If you see a job listing on Craigslist or one of those deep web adjacent job boards for Maritime Asset Protection paying $20,000 for a 3-week run, don't click it. Even if the rent is 3 months late. Even if your car just threw a rod and you're eating ramen dry out of the packet because you can't afford the gas to boil water. Just keep scrolling. Go donate plasma. Go sell a kidney. Do anything but sign the NDA for the MV Goliath. I wish someone had told me that a week ago. But nobody did. I was desperate, I was qualified, and I was stupid. The listing was vague. It asked for a background in private security, a valid passport, and the ability to work in confined spaces for extended periods. No experience with maritime law required. I sent my resume at 2 a.m. By 2:15 a.m., I had a phone call. The voice on the other end sounded like it was coming through a grinder, gravel and static. They didn't ask about my previous employment gaps. They didn't ask for references. They just gave me an address at the port of Tacoma and a time. 0300 hours. Tonight. The rain in Tacoma hits different than anywhere else. It's not just water. It's a freezing, oily mist that soaks through your jacket and settles in your bones. I parked my beat-up sedan in the long-term lot, grabbed my duffel bag, and walked toward the coordinates. The port at night is a labyrinth of stacked shipping containers, towering cranes that look like skeletal dinosaurs in the fog, and shadows that stretch way too far. I saw the ship before I reached the gate. The Goliath didn't look seaworthy. It looked like a floating bruise. The hull was painted a matte, light-sucking black, streaked with veins of orange rust that looked suspiciously like dried blood under the sodium harbor lights. It was an old freighter, maybe 70s vintage, but it had been retrofitted. The bridge was armored up with heavy steel plating, and there were no windows on the lower decks. Not a single one. It sat low in the water, heavy. Whatever we were carrying, it had mass. A man was waiting for me at the bottom of the gangway. He was wearing a yellow slicker that had faded to a sickly cream color. He didn't look up as I approached. He just held out a clipboard. "Sign here," he said. His voice was flat. Dead. I looked at the paper. It wasn't a liability waiver. It was a non-disclosure agreement so strict I'm pretty sure signing it gave them the rights to my bone marrow. I signed it anyway. I thought about the 20 grand. I thought about being debt-free. "Welcome aboard," the man said, snatching the clipboard back. He didn't introduce himself. He just turned and walked up the metal ramp. The sound of his boots on the steel grate rang out like gunshots in the quiet harbor. Clang, clang, clang. I followed him up. Crossing the threshold onto the deck felt like stepping into a freezer. The air pressure dropped. The smell of the ocean, salt and rotting kelp, vanished, replaced by the smell of diesel, ozone, and copper. "Follow me," the man said. "Do not wander." We navigated a maze of narrow corridors. The walls were painted that institutional green you see in old mental asylums and prisons. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with an angry, insectoid buzz. They flickered just enough to make you doubt your peripheral vision. We passed other crew members. 3 of them. They wore grey coveralls and didn't look at me. They walked with their heads down, hugging the walls, moving with a terrified urgency. The man in the yellow slicker stopped in front of a heavy iron door marked Security 01. He keyed in a code on a rusted keypad, and the door hissed open. Inside, it was small. A bunk, a bolted-down desk, a monitor bank displaying static-filled feeds of empty hallways, and a mini-fridge. On the desk sat a thick, black binder. "This is your station," the man said. "We cast off in 20 minutes. You are on the night rotation. Your shift starts when we hit international waters." He pointed a gloved finger at the binder. "Read the rules. Memorize them. If you break them, we cannot help you. We will not help you." "What are we carrying?" I asked. It was the first thing I'd said since arriving. The man finally looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles so deep they looked like bruises. He looked like he hadn't slept since the Nixon administration. "We are carrying cargo that requires biological maintenance," he said. "That is all you need to know." He stepped back into the corridor and grabbed the door handle. "One last thing," he said, and for a second, his flat expression broke, revealing sheer, unadulterated pity. "Do not listen to it. No matter what it says about your family. Do not listen." The door slammed shut. The lock engaged with a heavy thud that vibrated through the floor. I was alone. I sat on the bunk. The mattress was thin and smelled of stale sweat and bleach. The ship's engines rumbled to life beneath me, a deep, tectonic vibration that rattled my teeth. We were moving. I was locked in a steel box, moving away from land, away from cell service, away from sanity. I opened the binder. The first page was just a title in bold, courier font, Containment Protocols, Cargo Bay 4. I turned the page. There was no preamble. No welcome to the team. Just a list. The paper was worn, stained with coffee rings and what looked like grease marks from shaky fingers. The rules. 1. The feeding schedule is absolute. The entity located in Cargo Bay 4 must be fed once every hour, on the hour. Not at 12:01. Not at 11:59. Exactly on the hour. You will use the digital atomic clock mounted above the feed chute. If you miss a feeding by more than 30 seconds, the containment locks will automatically disengage to prevent structural failure. You do not want the locks to disengage. 2. Preparation of biomass. The mini fridge in your security station is stocked with vacuum-sealed packages of raw meat. Beef, pork, sometimes organ meat. Do not open the package until you are standing directly in front of the feed chute. The scent travels faster than you think. If you smell rot before you open the package, discard it immediately via the incinerator chute and grab a fresh one. The entity does not eat spoiled meat. It takes it as an insult. 3. The interaction method. There is a sliding slot on the heavy blast door of Bay 4. It is waist height. When the clock hits midnight, you will unlock the slide, push the meat through, and immediately slam it shut. Do not look through the slot. There is no glass. There is only darkness. If you look into the darkness, it will look back. Previous security personnel who violated this rule were found in a catatonic state, having clawed out their own eyes. 4. Auditory defense. You have been provided with industrial-grade noise-cancelling headphones. You must wear them from the moment you leave this security office until the moment you return. The entity is vocal. It mimics human speech. It mimics distress calls. It will sound like your mother screaming for help. It will sound like your child drowning. It will sound like the Coast Guard offering a rescue. It is lying. It is always lying. If you take off the headphones in the corridor, you will be compelled to open the door. 5. The hallway lights. The corridor leading to Cargo Bay 4 is lit by 4 overhead bulbs. If you step into the hallway and the third bulb is flickering, proceed as normal. If the third bulb is out completely, proceed as normal. If the third bulb is emitting a red light, return to the security room immediately and lock the door. Wait until the phone on the desk rings. Answer it. If there is static, hang up and wait 10 minutes. If a voice says, "It is safe," you may resume your duties. If the voice says, "Run," you are already dead, but you may attempt to hide under the bunk. 6. The knocking. Sometimes, between feedings, you will hear knocking on the door of this security room. 3 knocks is the captain. You may open the door. 4 knocks is the maintenance crew. You may open the door. 2 knocks is a trick. Do not open the door. Do not acknowledge it. If you hear scratching that sounds like wet fingernails on steel, turn up the volume on the television monitor to maximum and face the wall until it stops. 7. Total power failure. If the ship loses power, the magnetic seals on Bay 4 will fail within 90 seconds. You have a flashlight in the top drawer. You have a flare gun in the bottom drawer. The flare gun will not kill the entity, but the magnesium burn will distract it for approximately 5 seconds. Use those 5 seconds to jump overboard. Drowning is a preferable alternative to what happens in Bay 4. I finished reading the list. My hands were shaking. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. 23:45. 15 minutes until midnight. 15 minutes until the first feeding. I looked at the mini fridge. It hummed innocently in the corner. I walked over and opened it. Inside, stacked neatly, were dozens of clear plastic bags. They were filled with red, weeping meat. But it wasn't just steak or ground beef. Some of it looked like liver. Some of it looked like tongue. And the package on the top shelf, it looked disturbingly like fingers. I slammed the fridge shut. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I told myself this was a prank, a hazing ritual for the new guy, the entity, the rules. It was all just a ghost story to scare the fresh meat. Then, the ship lurched. We were hitting the open ocean swells now. The floor tilted beneath me. And from the wall adjacent to the corridor, the wall that led toward Cargo Bay 4, I heard a sound. It wasn't machinery. It wasn't the groan of the hull. It was a voice. Muffled, but distinct. It sounded exactly like my brother. My brother who died in a car accident 3 years ago. "Hey, let me in," the voice whispered through the steel. "It's cold out here. Just open the door." I stared at the wall. The blood drained from my face. I grabbed the noise-cancelling headphones from the desk and jammed them over my ears, engaging the switch. The silence was sudden and absolute. I looked at the clock. 23:50. 10 minutes. I grabbed a bag of meat from the fridge. It was cold and slick with condensation. I unlocked the heavy door of the security room and stepped out into the hallway. The air was freezing. The corridor stretched out before me, long and narrow, leading to a massive, circular blast door at the far end. The paint around the blast door was peeled and scorched, as if something incredibly hot had touched it from the inside. I looked up at the lights. Bulb 1, on. Bulb 2, on. Bulb 3. Bulb 3 was flickering. A rapid, strobe-like pulse. Safe. For now. I started walking toward the blast door. The floor grates clattered under my boots, but I couldn't hear them. I could only feel the vibration. Every step felt heavier than the last. The bag of meat in my hand felt like a lead weight. As I got closer to the blast door, I saw the feeding slot. It was a simple steel hatch, rusted at the edges. Above it, a red digital timer counted down. 5 minutes. 4 minutes and 59 seconds. I stood there, waiting in the artificial silence of the headphones. My breath fogged in the air. That's when I saw the handle of the feeding slot twitch. Just a fraction of an inch. Something on the other side was testing it. Testing the lock. Gently. I gripped the bag of meat tighter. I'm miles from shore. I'm trapped in a steel coffin with something that wears my dead brother's voice like a suit. And now I have to feed it. I checked the time. 2 minutes. I stepped up to the line painted on the floor. Yellow and black hazard stripes. Welcome to the night shift. I stared at the digital readout. The red numbers of the countdown timer were the only things that felt real in the hallway. Everything else, the humming lights, the vibrating floor, the smell of ozone, felt like a fever dream. 10 seconds. I moved my thumb to the seal of the vacuum bag. My gloves were slick with sweat inside, making my grip clumsy. 5 seconds. Do not look. That was the rule that stuck in my throat. How do you feed something without looking at it? You trust the geometry of the steel. You trust that the chute is designed to guide your hand just far enough to lose the meat, but not far enough to lose the arm. 3 seconds. I ripped the plastic open. The smell hit me instantly. Even through the rush of adrenaline, it was overpowering. It didn't smell like raw beef. It smelled like a slaughterhouse floor that had been left to bake in the sun for a week, mixed with something chemical, like burning hair. Midnight. I unlocked the slide. The metal screeched, a sound I felt in my teeth rather than heard through the headphones. I shoved the slide open with my left hand, and with my right, I thrust the bag of wet, unrecognizable flesh into the black void beyond the blast door. I expected resistance. I expected to just drop it onto a floor. I didn't expect the air pressure change. The moment the chute opened, a vacuum effect sucked the bag out of my hand. It was violent. The plastic whipped against my wrist, and for a split second, I felt the air inside the hallway rushing past me, pulled into the cargo bay. It was inhaling. The room wasn't just hungry, it was breathing. I slammed the slide shut. I threw the locking bolt. My heart was doing somersaults in my throat. I stepped back, hitting the opposite wall of the corridor. I waited. Rule 1 said the containment locks would disengage if I missed the window. I stared at the heavy iron bolts surrounding the doorframe. They remained still. The red light above the door blinked once, then turned solid green. Fed. I didn't stick around to celebrate. I turned and power-walked back toward the security office, keeping my eyes strictly on the floor grates. I didn't look at the flickering third bulb. I didn't look at the shadows stretching between the support beams. I just walked, counting my steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. When I got back to the security room, I threw myself inside, locked the door, and ripped the headphones off. The silence of the room was heavy. The only sound was the hum of the mini-fridge and the blood rushing in my ears. I collapsed onto the bunk, staring at the ceiling. 59 minutes until I had to do it again. My hands were trembling. I looked at them. There was a smear of red fluid on the cuff of my uniform jacket. Leakage from the bag. I rubbed it with my thumb. It was sticky, viscous. It didn't dry like blood. It stayed wet. I needed to distract myself. I couldn't sit here for an hour thinking about the vacuum suction of that room. I turned my chair to the desk and pulled the black binder toward me. The manual. The man in the yellow slicker said to memorize it. I had skimmed it, panicked, looking for the immediate survival items. Now, I needed to understand the ecosystem I had just sold my soul to join. I flipped past the feeding rules. Section 2. Environmental hazards. 8. The water supply. The tap water in the security bathroom is recycled from the ship's grey water system. It is treated with iodine and chlorine. It is safe to drink, technically. However, if the water comes out brown, run the tap for 30 seconds. If it stays brown, do not drink it. If it comes out clear but smells like almonds, do not drink it. If you hear whispering coming from the drain while the water is running, put the plug in immediately. 9. Crew interaction. You are not part of the crew. You are a contractor. The crew knows this. They have been instructed not to speak to you. This is for your safety, not theirs. If a crew member approaches you and asks for a cigarette, you may give them one. If they ask for your name, give them a fake one. If they ask you to follow them to the engine room to see something cool, decline politely and lock your door. There is nothing cool in the engine room. 10. Sleep protocol. You are on the night shift, 1800 to 0600. You are not permitted to sleep. To assist with this, we have provided caffeine pills in the first aid kit. Do not take more than 2 every 4 hours. If you do accidentally fall asleep and wake up to find the room is freezing and your breath is visible, do not move. Keep your eyes closed. Wait for the temperature to rise. If you open your eyes while the room is freezing, you will see the observer. The observer does not like being seen. I rubbed my temples. This read like a creepypasta written by a teenager, but the $20,000 was real. The ship was real. The thing behind the blast door that sucked the air out of the hallway was real. I turned another page, and a loose sheet of notebook paper flooded out. It wasn't printed. It was handwritten, scrawled in blue ballpoint pen. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. The paper was wrinkled, like it had been balled up and then smoothed out again. I picked it up. Notes from Dave, Shift 4. 1. The meat isn't just food. It's a sedative. The heavier the meat, pork, beef, the slower it gets. If you give it the organ meat, it gets hyper. Save the organs for when you're feeling awake and fast. Use the beef when you're tired. 2. The headphones work, but they aren't perfect. Sometimes the frequency bleeds through. If you hear a high-pitched ringing, that's not tinnitus. That's it trying to tune you. Hum a song. Something repetitive. Row, row, row your boat works for me. Disrupts the signal. 3. Rule 5 is a trap. The red light on the third bulb? It doesn't mean run. It means hide right there in the hall. If you run back to the room, it tracks the motion. Just freeze under the light until it stops glowing red. Trust me. I lost a finger testing this. 4. The fingers in the fridge. Do not feed at the fingers. I don't know why they are in there. I think it's a test. I think if you feed at the fingers, it learns what you taste like. I stared at the note. Dave. I looked at the mini fridge. I remembered the package on the top shelf. The long, pale digits vacuum sealed in plastic. My stomach churned. I had almost grabbed that bag just because it was on top. I looked at the clock. 0:45. 15 minutes left. I needed to use the bathroom. The anxiety was working through my system. The bathroom was a small, separate closet attached to the security office, thankfully. I didn't have to go into the hallway. I walked into the cramped lavatory. The mirror was made of polished steel, not glass, probably so it couldn't be shattered. I looked at my reflection. I looked pale, exhausted. My eyes were wide, pupils dilated. I turned on the tap. The water sputtered, coughed, and then flowed. It was clear. I splashed water on my face. It smelled like swimming pool chemicals, heavy on the chlorine. I dried my face with a rough paper towel. When I lowered the towel, I saw something in the steel mirror. Behind me, in the reflection of the open door leading back to the security room, the monitor bank was flickering. All the screens had gone black. I spun around. The monitors were dead. Static. Then, one by one, they popped back on. Camera 1, the bridge. Empty. Camera 2, the mess hall. Empty. Camera 3, the engine room corridor. There was someone in the engine room corridor. I walked back to the desk and leaned in close to the screen. The resolution was grainy, black and white. A figure was standing in the middle of the hallway. It was wearing the grey coveralls of the crew. It was standing perfectly still, facing away from the camera. I watched, holding my breath. The figure didn't move. It didn't sway with the motion of the ship. It looked rigid. Then, the figure took a step backward. Then another. It was walking in reverse. It moved with a jerky, unnatural rhythm. Step drag. Step drag. Moving backward down the corridor, heading toward the staircase that led up toward my deck. I checked the time. 0:55. 5 minutes to feeding time. I had to go out there. I had to walk into the hallway to feed the thing in Bay 4. And somewhere, on a deck below me, a crew member was moonwalking in reverse toward my location. Focus, I whispered to myself. Feed the beast. Get the money. Go home. I opened the fridge. I followed Dave's advice. I shoved aside the packages of liver and kidneys. I found a thick, dense slab of beef shoulder. Heavy meat. Sedative meat. I grabbed it. I put the headphones on. The silence clamped down over my head, drowning out the hum of the ship. I unlocked the security door and stepped out. The hallway was exactly as I had left it. Cold. Green. Bulb 1, on. Bulb 2, on. Bulb 3, flickering. Normal. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding and started walking. My boots felt heavy. The bag of beef swung by my side. I reached the hazard line. 0:58. 2 minutes early. Better early than late, provided I didn't open the chute until the 0 hour. I stood there, staring at the rusted steel of the blast door. And then I felt it. Through the soles of my boots. A rhythmic vibration. Thump. Drag. Thump. Drag. It was coming from the floor grates behind me. I froze. Rule 4. If you take off the headphones in the corridor, you will be compelled to open the door. I couldn't take off the headphones to hear what was behind me, but I could feel the vibration getting stronger. Someone, or something, was walking down the corridor toward my back, and they were doing it with that heavy, limping step I had seen on the monitor. I squeezed the bag of meat. 0:59. 1 minute. The vibration stopped. I could feel a presence. You know that feeling when someone is standing right behind you? The hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The air feels displaced. I stared at the timer. 30 seconds. I wanted to turn around. Every instinct in my primate brain screamed at me to turn around and defend myself. But the rules. The man in the yellow slicker had said nothing about things walking up behind you. But Dave's note. Dave said the rules were traps. No, Dave said Rule 5 was a trap. He didn't say anything about visitors. I stared at the black slot. 10 seconds. A hand settled on my shoulder. I screamed. It was a silent scream, trapped in my throat, muffled by the headphones. The hand was heavy. It was wearing a grey work glove. It gripped my shoulder hard, fingers digging into my trapezius muscle. I didn't turn. I couldn't turn. I had 10 seconds to feed the thing in front of me or the locks would disengage. If the locks disengaged, whatever was behind me would be the least of my problems. 5 seconds. The hand on my shoulder squeezed tighter, painful now. 3 seconds. I unlocked the slide. 1 second. The hand ripped away from my shoulder. I shoved the meat into the chute. This time, there was no suction. Something grabbed the bag. I felt fingers. Cold, wet, slender fingers brushed against my glove hand inside the darkness of the chute. They caressed my knuckles for a microsecond before snatching the beef away. I yanked my hand back and slammed the slide. I threw the bolt. I spun around, my back pressing against the blast door, fists raised, ready to fight. The corridor was empty. No crew member. No man in grey coveralls. But on the floor, right where I had been standing, there was a puddle. It was seawater. Dark, oily, and smelling of rot. And in the center of the puddle was a single barnacle, scraped off a hull, still wet. I stared at the water. My heart was hammering so hard my vision was pulsing. I looked up at the lights. Bulb 1, on. Bulb 2, on. Bulb 3, red. The third bulb wasn't flickering. It was glowing a deep, blood-soaked crimson. My stomach dropped. Rule 5. If the third bulb is emitting a red light, return to the security room immediately. But Dave's note. Rule 5 is a trap. It means hide right there in the hall. It tracks motion. I stood frozen against the blast door. The red light bathed the corridor in a hellish glow. It made the green walls look black. I had a choice. Trust the official manual, printed by the company that hired me? Or trust Dave, the guy who left frantic scribbles and apparently survived long enough to learn the truth? The phone in the security room began to ring. I couldn't hear it through the headphones, but I saw the light on the wall outside the room flashing. The strobe meant an incoming call. Wait until the phone on the desk rings. Answer it. That was the official rule. But to answer it, I had to move. I had to run down the hall, under the red light. If Dave was right, moving meant death. If the manual was right, staying here meant death. I looked at the puddle of seawater on the floor. It was spreading, slowly inching toward my boots. I made a choice. I didn't run. I slid down the wall until I was crouching. I made myself as small as possible, tucking my knees to my chest, right there on the hazard stripes of the blast door. I hummed, "Row, row, row your boat." I watched the red light, and then I saw it. Something dropped from the ceiling, right in front of the security room door. It looked like a spider, but it was made of human limbs. 4 arms, 4 legs, fused together at a central torso that was twisted inside out. It was wearing the tattered remains of a security uniform. It hung from the pipes by its hands, swinging silently. Its head, upside down, scanned the corridor. It had no eyes, just smooth skin where sockets should be. It dropped to the floor and sniffed the air. It scurried toward the security room door. It paused. It seemed to be listening to the ringing phone inside. Then, it shrieked. A sound so loud it pierced my noise-canceling headphones like an ice pick. It leaped up, grabbed the handle of the security door, and rattled it. Locked. It turned its head back toward the hallway. Toward me. I stopped humming. I stopped breathing. The red light bathed us both. The thing sniffed again. It took a step toward me. Then, the red light snapped off. The bulb went dark. The thing shrieked again, a sound of frustration, and scrambled up the wall, disappearing into the shadows of the overhead pipes and ductwork. Bulb 3 stayed dark. If the third bulb is out completely, proceed as normal. I waited 5 minutes. My legs were cramping. My bladder was screaming. I stood up slowly. The hallway was empty. The spider thing was gone. I walked back to the security room. I didn't run. I walked with a terrified, measured calmness. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. The phone had stopped ringing. I collapsed into the chair. I looked at the binder. I looked at Dave's note. "Thanks, Dave," I whispered. I looked at the clock. 1:15. 45 minutes until the next feeding. I opened the binder again. I needed to find more notes. I needed to know what the hell that thing in the hallway was. It wasn't the entity in Bay 4. It was something else. Something that lived in the pipes. I flipped through the pages frantically. I found another scribble on the back of the emergency evacuation plan. The scavengers. The things in the ceiling used to be security. They broke the rules. Now they enforce them. They are blind, but they can smell fear pheromones. If you see one, think of something boring. Math problems. Baseball stats. If you panic, you smell like dinner. I wiped the sweat from my forehead. The ship lurched again, harder this time. A storm was picking up outside. I looked at the monitor. Camera 4 showed the rear deck. Waves were crashing over the railing. And in the center of the deck, standing in the pouring rain, was the man in the yellow slicker. He was looking directly into the camera. He held up a sign. It was handwritten on cardboard, the ink running in the rain. "Check the cargo." I frowned. Check the cargo. That was impossible. Rule 3. Do not look. I zoomed in on the monitor. The man flipped the sign over. The lock is broken. My blood ran cold. I looked at the feeds of the hallway. The blast door looked secure. The green light was on. But then I saw it. On the floor, where the water puddle had been, the hazard stripe tape was peeled back, and the metal floor plate, it was bent upwards. From underneath. Something hadn't just come out of the walls. Something had come up from the ballast tanks. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer. I grabbed the flare gun. I checked the time. 1:30. I had 30 minutes to figure out if the containment was breached, or if the man in the yellow slicker was hallucination number 3 of the evening. I opened the drawer again to grab the caffeine pills. I needed to be sharp. The bottle was empty. I shook it. Nothing. I looked at the bottom of the drawer. Scratched into the metal with a knife were 3 words. They drugged you. My eyelids suddenly felt very, very heavy. Welcome to the night shift. The panic didn't hit me like a lightning bolt. It hit me like a mudslide. Slow, heavy, and suffocating. They drugged you. I stared at the words carved into the metal drawer bottom. The jagged scratches caught the harsh fluorescent light. My brain tried to process the information, but the signal was getting lost in a fog. My limbs felt inflated, like they were filled with helium and lead at the same time. The hum of the ship's engine dropped an octave, turning into a slow, rhythmic thrum that sounded suspiciously like a massive heartbeat. I slapped my own face. Hard. The sting was dull, distant. Wake up, I gritted out. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. If the caffeine pills were sedatives, I had probably just ingested enough benzodiazepines to knock out a horse. And I had 45 minutes before I had to walk that green mile again. If I fell asleep, I missed the feeding. If I missed the feeding, the locks opened. If the locks opened, well, I'd be awake for that part, briefly. I needed pain. Pain cuts through the fog. I grabbed the staple remover from the desk. I didn't think about it. I just clamped it onto the webbing of skin between my thumb and index finger and squeezed. A sharp, hot spike of agony shot up my arm. My vision cleared for a second. The room snapped back into focus. Okay, I panted, adrenaline warring with the chemicals in my blood. Okay, stay awake. Feed the beast. Get paid. I turned back to the binder. I needed to know more about the lock is broken sign the man in the yellow slicker had shown me. I flipped through the pages, my movements clumsy. The paper felt wet, though my hands were dry. I found section 4, structural integrity. 14, hull groans. The Goliath is an old vessel. You will hear groaning metal. This is normal. However, if the groaning sounds like vocalizations, i.e., weeping, laughing, or screaming, report it to the bridge immediately via the red phone. Note, the bridge will likely not answer. Document the time of the scream in the logbook. 15. Corrosion. The cargo in Bay 4 emits a corrosive byproduct during digestion. The containment cell is lined with lead and ceramic. If you see orange liquid seeping through the rivets of the blast door, do not touch it. It is not rust. It is highly acidic bile. Use the bag of lime in the supply closet to neutralize it. I looked at the closet. There was a bag of garden lime sitting on the floor. It was open and half empty. The floor around it was stained with white powder. Someone had been using it. Recently. I checked the clock. 1:45. 15 minutes. The time was dissolving. It felt like I had just sat down. I stood up to test my legs. The room tilted. I grabbed the desk for support. The floor felt spongy, like walking on a peat bog. I dry heaved, my stomach cramping around the empty nothingness inside it. Coffee, I muttered. I need coffee. There was no coffee maker, just the mini fridge full of nightmares. I went to the bathroom again and splashed freezing water on my face. The shock helped. I kept the water running, listening for whispers in the drain. Nothing but the gurgle of plumbing. I looked in the mirror. My pupils were pinpricks. You're fine, I lied to my reflection. You're just tired. I went back to the fridge. Rule 2, the entity does not eat spoiled meat. I had to be careful. If my senses were dulled by the drugs, could I smell the rot? I opened the fridge door. The smell of raw meat wafted out, metallic and sweet. I reached for a bag of pork shoulder. It was heavy, wrapped tightly. I held it up to my nose. It smelled like pork. Cold, dead pork. I grabbed the headphones. I grabbed the flashlight. 1:55. Time to go. I stepped out into the hallway. The temperature had dropped. It was significantly colder than the 1 o'clock run. My breath plumed in front of me in thick, grey clouds. The condensation on the walls had frozen into intricate, fractal patterns of frost. Bulb 1, on. Bulb 2, on. Bulb 3, flickering. I started walking. My boots crunched on the frost. Step, crunch, step, crunch. The drug made the hallway look like it was stretching. The perspective was all wrong. The blast door looked miles away, shrinking into the distance like a dolly zoom shot in a movie. Just walk, I whispered. Row, row, row your boat. I kept my eyes on the floor. I passed the spot where the puddle of seawater had been. The water was gone, but the floor plate was still bent upward, the metal stressed and whitened at the crease. I reached the hazard line. 1:58. I stood before the blast door. I looked at the rivets holding the frame to the bulkhead. They were weeping. Thick, orange sludge was bubbling out from around the bolts. It looked like rust, but it was moving. It sizzled faintly, popping like frying bacon. A drop fell onto the steel floor and hissed, eating a small pockmark into the grate. The lock is broken. The man in the slicker was right. The door wasn't unlocked. The door was dissolving. I checked the timer. 15 seconds. I needed to focus on the feeding. If I missed the window, the dissolving bolts wouldn't matter because the magnetic seals would disengage, and I'd be sucked into the room with whatever was in there. 10 seconds. I prepared the bag. My fingers were numb from the cold and the drugs. I fumbled with the tear strip. It wouldn't give. Panic flared, hot and sharp. The plastic was slippery. 5 seconds. Come on, you piece of... I bit the plastic. My teeth tore through the vacuum seal. The smell of the pork hit me, mixed with the acrid scent of the sizzling orange slime on the doorframe. 3 seconds. I ripped the bag open. 1 second. I unlocked the slide. The metal screeched, louder this time, grinding against the corrosion. I shoved the meat in. This time, the chute was illuminated. Just for a second. A flash of bioluminescence from inside the cargo bay. A pulse of sickly blue light. In that split second, before I slammed the slide shut, I saw skin. Not the skin of an animal. It was pale, hairless, and vast. It looked like human skin, magnified 1,000 times. And embedded in the skin were teeth. Thousands of them. Molars, incisors, canines, arranged in spiraling patterns like the center of a sunflower. The meat didn't fall into a mouth. It fell onto the floor, and the floor rippled. The teeth in the floor gnashed together, grinding the pork to paste in an instant. I slammed the slide. I threw the bolt. I backed away, gagging. The orange slime on the doorframe bubbled more aggressively, reacting to the movement inside. It's not an animal, I wheezed, the realization cutting through the drug haze. It's the room. The whole room is the mouth. I turned to walk back. That's when I heard the singing. It was coming from the headphones. Active noise cancelling works by creating an inverse sound wave to cancel out external noise. It creates silence. But this wasn't silence. It was a woman's voice. Soft, melodic, humming a lullaby. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. I clawed at the headphones, trying to turn the volume down, but there was no volume dial. The switch was just on or off. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. The voice was inside the circuitry. I ripped the headphones off. The hallway noise rushed in. The hum of the lights, the groan of the ship, the sizzle of the acid. And a wet, slapping sound. Slap, drag, slap, drag. I looked down the corridor toward the security room. Standing directly under the flickering third bulb was the figure in the grey coveralls. The Moonwalker. He was facing me this time. But he didn't have a face. Where his face should have been, the skin was smooth, unbroken flesh. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a blank canvas of pale meat. He stood perfectly still, bathed in the strobe light effect of the flickering bulb. On, off, He took a step toward me. I froze. I was halfway between the blast door and the security room. He was blocking my path. The rules. Think of the rules. Dave's note: if the third bulb is flickering, proceed as normal. Proceed as normal. But there was a faceless man standing in the way. "Excuse me," I said. My voice sounded insane in my own ears. "I need to get past." The figure didn't move. It tilted its head, like a dog listening to a high-pitched whistle. The drug was pulling at my consciousness. My knees felt like water. I couldn't fight him. I couldn't run. I remembered the other note. The scavengers. Think of something boring. Math problems. This wasn't a scavenger. It was on the floor, not the ceiling. But maybe the logic held. Maybe it sensed fear. 2 + 2 is 4, I whispered, forcing my feet to move. I walked straight toward him. 4 × 4 is 16. The square root of 16 is 4. I kept my eyes on his chest, avoiding the blank horror of his face. The capital of Nebraska is Lincoln. The atomic weight of gold is... I didn't know the atomic weight of gold. Gold is heavy, I whispered. Gold is expensive. I was 10 feet away from him. He didn't move. 5 feet. I could smell him. He smelled like ozone and old pennies. I walked right past him. I was close enough to brush against the fabric of his coveralls. He didn't grab me. He didn't scream. But as I passed, I heard a sound coming from his chest cavity. A wet, gurgling sound. "Help me." The voice was muffled, vibrating through his ribs. It sounded like it was coming from inside a fluid-filled sack. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I kept walking, counting my steps. 31, 32, 33. I reached the security room door. I keyed the code. 0-4-5-1. The door hissed open. I stumbled inside and slammed it shut, engaging the deadbolt. I slumped against the door, sliding down to the floor. I checked the monitor. The hallway was empty. The moonwalker was gone. I looked at the clock. 2:10. 50 minutes until the next feeding. I crawled over to the bunk and pulled myself up. My body was screaming for sleep. The drugs were winning. I grabbed the binder again. I needed a distraction. I needed to know what the hell the moonwalker was. I found a section labeled personnel. It was redacted heavily. Entire pages were blacked out with marker, but one entry near the bottom was legible. Subject 89, the Hollow Men. Crew members exposed to the localized reality distortion field of Cargo Bay 4 for longer than 6 months may experience facial erasure. This is a cosmetic side effect and does not affect their ability to perform manual labor. Do not engage in conversation. They are conscious, but they are no longer individuals. They are vessels for the entity's waste frequency. Great, I mumbled. Faceless janitors. Fantastic. My eyes were closing. I pinched my arm with the staple remover again, but the pain was duller this time. The tolerance was building. I needed to do something active. The bag of lime in the closet. The manual said to neutralize the acid. I stood up, swaying. I went to the closet and dragged the heavy bag of garden lime out. It left a trail of white dust on the floor. I set it by the door. Next run, I'd take a scoop. Try to keep the door from melting. Knock. Knock. I froze. The sound came from the heavy iron door I was leaning against. 2 knocks. Rule 6. 2 knocks is a trick. Do not open the door. I held my breath. Knock. Knock. I know you're in there, a voice said. It was my voice. Not my brother's voice. My voice. It sounded exactly like me, recorded and played back through a high-quality speaker. Open up, the voice said. I forgot the keys. The scavengers are coming. Let me in. I stared at the door handle. It was vibrating slightly with the force of the knocking. You're drugged, the voice said. You're hallucinating. You're actually out here in the hall, sleeping. You need to wake yourself up. Open the door and wake up. It was a compelling argument. For a second, a terrifying second, I believed it. What if I had passed out in the hall? What if the moonwalker got me? I reached for the lock. Then I saw the bag of lime. The white dust on my boots. Real. Physical matter. Go away, I whispered. Let me in. the voice screamed. It wasn't my voice anymore. It was a distorted, digital shriek. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound of wet fingernails on steel. I scrambled over to the monitor bank. I turned the volume knob on the TV screen all the way up. Static roared into the room, white noise at 100 decibels. I pressed my hands over my ears and faced the back wall, staring at the rivets. The scratching continued for what felt like hours. It sounded like something trying to burrow through the metal. Eventually, it stopped. I turned the volume down. My ears were ringing. I checked the clock. 2:50. 10 minutes to feeding. I felt sick. Physically, mentally, spiritually sick. The repetition was grinding me down. The fear wasn't a spike anymore. It was a constant, low-level nausea. I went to the fridge. Rule 1. The feeding schedule is absolute. I grabbed a bag of organ meat this time. A glob of liver. Dave said save the organs for when you're fast, I muttered. But I'm not fast. I'm slow. Maybe the liver will wake it up, make it less grindy. I grabbed a plastic cup from the desk and scooped it full of garden lime from the bag. Meat in one hand. Cup of white powder in the other. Headphones on. I unlocked the door. The hallway was empty. No moonwalker. No scavengers. But the red light. Bulb 3 was red again. Rule 5. If the third bulb is emitting a red light, return to the security room. I stood in the doorway. If I went back, I missed the feeding. If I missed the feeding, the locks failed. If I went forward, I broke Rule 5. But Dave said Rule 5 was a trap. Hide right there in the hall. But I had to get to the door to feed it. I couldn't hide. I looked at the floor. The scavenger hadn't come from the red light. It had come from the ceiling pipes. The red light was just an alarm. Screw it, I hissed. I ran. I sprinted through the red light. The corridor was bathed in the color of a developing room. The shadows stretched and danced. I reached the hazard line. The corrosion on the doorframe was worse. The orange slime was dripping faster now. A puddle of acid had formed at the base of the door. I tossed the cup of lime onto the puddle. It hissed violently, smoke billowing up. The acid turned a chunky, inert gray. Small victory. 5 seconds. I held the bag of liver. 3 seconds. I ripped it open. The smell was iron-heavy, pungent. Midnight. I unlocked the slide. I shoved the meat in. This time, something shoved back. A burst of air pressure hit me in the chest, smelling of ozone and rot. And a sound. Not a shriek. Not a growl. A word. Spoken clearly, from the darkness of the cargo bay, right into my face as I leaned into the chute. More. I slammed the slide shut. I locked it. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the flashlight. It spoke. It didn't mimic. It demanded. I turned to run back to the security room. The red light on bulb 3 died. The corridor went dark, save for bulb 1 and 2. And standing in the darkness, between me and safety, was the man in the yellow slicker. He wasn't a hallucination this time. He was dripping wet. He smelled of rain and salt. He held up a new sign. They are coming. He pointed up. I looked up. Above the pipes, in the crawlspace darkness of the ceiling, I saw eyes. Dozens of them. Glowing faint green. The scavengers. Not one. A pack. They were waking up. The man in the slicker dropped the sign and pointed at the floor grate near my feet. He mouthed one word. Under. He wanted me to go into the maintenance subfloor. I looked at the security room. It was 50 feet away. The ceiling above it was crawling with limbs. I looked at the floor grate. It was rusted, but loose. I looked at the clock on the wall above the chute. 3:05. I had 55 minutes. I grabbed the grate and heaved. It came loose with a groan of metal. Below was darkness, cables, and the sound of rushing water. I looked back at the man in yellow. He was gone. The ceiling hissed. A long, multi-jointed arm dropped down, swiping at the air where my head had been a second ago. I jumped into the hole. I pulled the grate shut above me just as something heavy landed on it. I fell about 6 feet, landing on a bundle of thick rubber cables. It was a crawl space, a service tunnel running under the deck plates. It smelled like mold and electricity. I turned on my flashlight. The beam cut through the dusty air. The tunnel stretched out in both directions. Scratched into the insulation of the pipe next to my head was another note: "Keep quiet." They listened to the floor. I lay there in the dark, breathing through my nose, listening to the click-clack of claws walking on the grate above my head. My eyelids were heavy. The drug was pulling me down into the black. I had to feed it in 55 minutes, but I couldn't go back up there. Not yet. I crawled forward. Welcome to the night shift. I crawled forward. The space beneath the deck was a tangled intestinal tract of the Goliath. Thick, rubberized cables snaked along the floor, pulsing with heat and vibration. Overhead, the steel plating of the corridor floor was mere inches from my scalp. I could hear the click-click hiss of the scavengers pacing above me. They sounded heavy, like Great Danes with ceramic paws. Every time one stepped on a grate, dust and flakes of rust rained down into my eyes. The drugs were fighting a war against my adrenaline. My limbs felt like they were moving through molasses, disconnected from my brain. I had to consciously tell my right knee to move, then my left hand. Plant, drag, plant, drag. I was becoming a moonwalker myself, just horizontally. I checked my watch. The luminous dial seemed too bright in the gloom. 3:15. 45 minutes. The crawl space was suffocatingly hot. The air smelled of burnt hair and ozone, magnified by the confined space. And there was a sound, a low, wet thrumming, coming from the walls of the tunnel. It sounded like a stomach digesting a heavy meal. I swept the flashlight beam ahead. The tunnel narrowed. Pipes intersected the path, forcing me to squeeze my ribcage against the floor to shimmy under them. I saw something stuck to a bundle of blue cables about 10 yards ahead. It looked like a nest. I army crawled closer, the flashlight trembling in my hand. It wasn't a nest. It was a uniform, a security jacket, shredded and matted together with a substance that looked like grey resin. I reached out to touch it, then pulled my hand back. The resin was vibrating. It was alive. Tiny, translucent mites were swarming over the fabric, knitting it into the cables. Inside the jacket collar, I saw a glint of metal. Dog tags. I wiped the mites away with the butt of the flashlight. They crunched wetly. Name: R. Henderson. Rank: Security L1. Status: expired. Except expired wasn't stamped by a machine. It was scratched into the metal tag with a knife point. I looked at the sleeve of the jacket. There was an arm inside it, or what was left of one. The flesh had calcified, turning into a porous, coral-like substance that fused perfectly with the ship's wiring. Henderson hadn't died here. He had been absorbed. I gagged, the bile rising in my throat. The smell of the mites was sweet, like rotting peaches. I pushed past the corpse fuse. I didn't want to know if Henderson was still conscious in there, conducting electricity for the Goliath. I needed to find a way up. The man in the yellow slicker pointed under, but he didn't give me a map. I was crawling blind under a ship that wanted to eat me, while a monster upstairs waited for its hourly snack. Then, the ship screamed. It wasn't a metal groan. It was a high-pitched, electronic shriek that blasted through the crawlspace. The blue cables beneath me flared with blinding light. My headphones crackled. The noise-cancelling circuit failed for a split second, letting the sound drill into my skull. Feed. The voice came from everywhere. It came from the pipes. It came from the dead man's jacket. It came from my own teeth vibrating in my jaw. The entity in Bay 4 wasn't waiting for the hour mark anymore. It was getting impatient. I scrambled forward, panic overriding the sedative haze. I scraped my elbows raw on the grating. Okay, I'm coming, I panted. Just don't open the door. I saw a vertical shaft ahead. A ladder, rusted and narrow, leading up to a hatch. I grabbed the rungs. They were slick with condensation. I hauled myself up, banging my head on the hatch wheel. I listened. Above me, silence. No clicking claws. No hissing. I spun the wheel. It resisted, corroded by salt, but finally gave with a screech of tortured metal. I pushed the hatch open and peeked out. I wasn't in the hallway. I was in the pantry. Stainless steel shelves towered around me, stacked with industrial-sized cans of beans, corn, and peaches. The floor was tiled in black and white checkers. I pulled myself up and out of the hole, collapsing onto the cool tile. The air here smelled of dust and flour. I stood up, swaying. The drugs hit me again, a wave of vertigo that sent me stumbling into a shelf of canned tomatoes. Clang. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I froze. From the other side of the door leading to the mess hall, I heard movement. Slap. Drag. Slap. Drag. A moonwalker. But this one sounded fast. The rhythm was agitated. Slap drag, slap drag. I looked around for a weapon. A can of peaches? A ladle? I saw a knife block on the prep counter. Empty. Of course. I checked the time. 3:35. I was in the kitchen. The security room was 2 decks up and about 100 yards aft. I had 25 minutes to navigate a ship swarming with faceless janitors and ceiling spiders, grab a bag of meat, and feed a hole in the wall that just screamed at me telepathically. And I was starving. Not normal hunger. This was sudden, violent starvation. My stomach cramped so hard I doubled over. My mouth watered painfully. It felt like my body was trying to digest its own lining. Starvation mode. The phase the binder hadn't mentioned. It wasn't just the entity that starved. It was a localized effect. The hunger radiated outward. I looked at the can of peaches in my hand. I wanted to smash it open and drink the syrup. I wanted to eat the tin. Focus, I hissed, biting my tongue until I tasted blood. The pain sharpened my focus. Meat first, peaches later. I crept to the pantry door. I cracked it open. The mess hall was dim, lit only by the green emergency running lights along the floor. Tables were bolted to the deck. In the center of the room, 3 moonwalkers were standing in a circle. They were holding hands. They wore the same grey coveralls, their faces blank slates of flesh. They were swaying back and forth, vibrating. And in the center of their circle, on the floor, was a pile of raw meat. It was the inventory from the mini-fridge. My heart stopped. They had raided the security room. They had the beef. They had the pork. They had the livers. The moonwalkers weren't eating it. They were worshipping it, humming at it. I watched as one of the faceless men bent down. A vertical slit opened in the smooth flesh of his face, a mockery of a mouth, lined with needle teeth, and he picked up a vacuum-sealed bag of flank steak. He swallowed it whole, bag and all. Then the next one took a bag. They were destroying the food supply. No, I whispered. No, no, no. If they ate the bait, I had nothing to feed the beast. If I had nothing to feed the beast opened the door. I had to intervene. I looked at the flare gun in my waistband. I had 1 shot. I looked at the clock. 3:42. I kicked the pantry door open. Hey! I shouted. That's mine. The 3 moonwalkers stopped swaying. They turned their blank faces toward me in unison. The slit mouths opened. They hissed, a sound like steam escaping a valve. I raised the flare gun. Drop the meat, I ordered, my voice trembling. The leader, the one who had just swallowed the steak, took a step toward me. Slap. Drag. He lunged. He moved with terrifying speed, his limbs snapping out like tense rubber bands. I fired. The flare hit him center mass. It didn't penetrate. It stuck to the heavy canvas of his coveralls and ignited. Magnesium burns at over 3,000 degrees. The moonwalker shrieked, a digital, glitching scream, and flailed, batting at the blinding white fire on his chest. The other 2 recoiled, shielding their non-eyes from the light. I didn't wait to see if he burned. I sprinted into the room. I dove for the pile of meat. Most of it was gone. Eaten. There were only 2 packages left on the floor. One was a small bag of chicken gizzards. Not enough mass. The entity would be insulted. The other was the package I had avoided all night. The fingers. 5 long, pale digits, vacuum sealed in heavy plastic. They looked human, but the joints were wrong. Too many knuckles. I grabbed the fingers. I grabbed the gizzards. The burning moonwalker crashed into a table, setting the tablecloth on fire. The sprinklers overhead hissed, then erupted, showering the room in brown, oily water. Run, I told myself. I bolted for the exit. Behind me, the other 2 moonwalkers were recovering from the flash blindness. I heard the wet slap of their feet on the wet deck. They were chasing me. I hit the corridor. I knew the layout from the safety maps in the binder. Stairwell B was 20 feet to the left. I slid on the wet floor, scrambled up, and hit the stairs. I took them 2 at a time, my lungs burning. The drug fatigue was a physical weight now, dragging at my ankles like deep water. I reached the upper deck. Security level. I burst into the hallway. It was chaos. The lights weren't just flickering, they were strobing violently. Bulb 1, 2, 3, and 4 were flashing in a dissonant pattern that made me nauseous. The walls were breathing. The steel plates expanded and contracted like a ribcage. The paint was peeling off in strips, revealing pulsating red veins underneath. And the sound. It was a roar. A constant, deafening roar of wind and machinery. I looked down the hall toward Cargo Bay 4. The blast door was shaking. The heavy iron locking bolts were rattling in their housings. The timer above the chute read, 3:55. 5 minutes. But the hallway wasn't empty. Hanging from the ceiling, directly over the hazard line, were the scavengers. 6 of them. They were clustered together, a chandelier of limbs and torsos, blocking the path to the chute. They were agitated by the noise, snapping at the air, dripping saliva onto the floor. I stopped. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air. I had the meat, the fingers. I had the time, barely. But I couldn't get to the chute without walking directly under the meat grinder on the ceiling. Think, I pleaded. Think of something boring. Subject 89. Scavengers. Smell fear pheromones. I was terrified. I reeked of sweat, rain, and fear. I smelled like a buffet. I looked at the bag of chicken gizzards in my left hand. Distraction, I whispered. I needed to make them look away. I squeezed the bag of gizzards. I popped the seal. The smell of raw poultry hit the air. The scavengers hissed. 12 heads turned toward me. I wound up and threw the bag of gizzards as hard as I could, not toward the chute, but back down the hallway, toward the stairwell door I had just come through. The bag sailed through the air, leaking bloody fluid. It hit the wall with a wet thwack and slid down. The scavengers dropped. They moved like liquid nightmare. They fell from the ceiling in a tangle of limbs and skidded down the hall, fighting each other to get to the chicken. The path to the chute was clear. I ran. 3:58. I reached the hazard line. The floor was hot. The metal was radiating heat like a skillet. I looked at the blast door. It wasn't just weeping orange slime anymore. The metal was translucent. I could see through the blast door. It looked like looking into a furnace. Swirling orange and red fog. And in the center of the fog, a shadow. Massive. Skeletal. It was pressing its hands against the other side of the door. Hands that matched the fingers in the bag I was holding. Oh God, I whimpered. The timer ticked down. 10 seconds. The entity roared. Now. The air pressure dropped so low my ears popped. The hallway was entering a vacuum. I looked at the bag of fingers. Rule: do not feed it the fingers. It learns what you taste like. But it was all I had. The moonwalkers ate the beef. The scavengers ate the chicken. It was this, or the door opens. 5 seconds. I'm sorry, I whispered to the universe. I'm so sorry. I ripped the bag open. The fingers were warm. They twitched in my hand. They grabbed my glove. 3 seconds. I unlocked the slide. It didn't screech. It melted. The metal was soft like wax. I pushed the slide open with my thumb. 1 second. I thrust the squirming, twitching hand cluster into the chute. Something on the other side grabbed it. It wasn't a violent snatch. It was a gentle, welcoming clasp. A handshake. A voice whispered from the chute, intimate and terrifyingly clear. Brother. I yanked my hand back. I slammed the wax-soft slide shut. I threw the bolt. The timer reset. 1 hour. The translucency of the door faded. The orange glow died down. The heat dissipated. The hallway stopped breathing. The lights stabilized. I slumped against the opposite wall, sliding down until I hit the floor. Fed, I croaked. But something was wrong. I looked at my hand. My right hand. The one that had fed the chute. My glove was missing. I hadn't taken it off. I looked at my fingers. They were pale. Pale and long. And on the middle knuckle of my index finger, A new joint was forming, a lump of bone pushing up under the skin. I flexed my hand. It felt powerful. It felt hungry. I stared at it in horror. It learns what you taste like. It hadn't just tasted me. It had marked me. I scrambled up, clutching my mutating hand to my chest. I needed to get back to the security room. I needed to cut this off. I needed a tourniquet. I turned toward the security office. The door was open. I had locked it. I vividly remembered locking it, but it was standing wide open. And sitting in my chair, facing the monitors, was a man. He was wearing a yellow slicker. He swiveled the chair around. It wasn't the sad, tired man from the dock. It wasn't the helpful hallucination. The man in the chair had no face, just smooth, pale skin. But he had a mouth, a vertical slit, stitched shut with black wire. He held up a sign. Phase 2 complete. He dropped the sign. He picked up another one. The ship is awake. The floor beneath me buckled. It wasn't a wave. It was a muscle spasm. The entire corridor twisted. The metal groaned, screeching as rivets popped like bullets. Gravity shifted. The floor became the wall. The wall became the ceiling. I fell. I slid down the inclined steel of the hallway, screaming, tumbling toward the far end, toward the blast door. But the blast door wasn't there anymore. The metal had retracted. Cargo Bay 4 was open. It wasn't a room. It was a throat. A massive, fleshy tunnel lined with bioluminescent teeth, spiraling down into the dark. I clawed at the floor grating, my fingernails tearing off. I hooked my boot on a pipe. I hung there, dangling over the moor. The smell coming out of the pit was intoxicating. It smelled like home. It smelled like my mother's cooking. It smelled like safety. "Come in," the pit whispered. "It's warm inside." "No." I screamed. I scrambled up the incline, fighting the tilting ship. The faceless man in the yellow slicker stood in the doorway of the security room, which was now above me, on the ceiling. He looked down at me. He pointed to the binder on the desk. It slid off the desk and fell. It tumbled through the air, flapping like a dying bird, and landed on my chest. I grabbed it with my mutating hand. I looked up at the man. He pointed at the binder again. "Read it." I opened the binder with trembling fingers. The pages were rearranging themselves. The ink was crawling across the paper like spiders. The old rules were gone. The starvation mode page was burned out. A new page had generated. The ink was still wet. It was red. Phase 3, digestion. 1. You are no longer the warden. 2. You are the pathogen. 3. The antibody is coming. A siren began to wail. It wasn't the ship's alarm. It was a biological sound, a scream from the lungs of the Goliath. From the darkness of the cargo bay throat below me, something started to climb up. I saw a hand grip the edge of the teeth. It was huge. It was grey, and it was wearing a tattered captain's hat. Knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks. Rule 6, 3 knocks is the captain. But the rules had changed. I shoved the binder into my jacket. I looked at the security room above me. It was too high to reach. I looked at the ventilation shaft near my feet. It was small, tight. The antibody is coming. The captain roared, pulling his massive, barnacle-encrusted shoulders out of the pit. I kicked the vent grate in. I squeezed my body into the ductwork. It was tight. My shoulders barely fit. I crawled. Faster this time. Behind me, I heard the captain stepping onto the metal floor. The sound was heavy enough to dent the steel. Tomb. Tomb. He was walking up the wall. He was defying gravity. "Where is he?" the captain bellowed. His voice sounded like grinding rocks. "Where is the germ?" I turned a corner in the duct. I dragged myself into the dark. My right hand twitched. The extra knuckle clicked. My stomach growled. Loudly. I looked at my left hand, the one that was still normal. It looked delicious. I shoved my fist into my mouth to stop the scream. Welcome to the night shift. 4:15. 45 minutes to feeding. If there was still a feeding, if there was still a door, I crawled deeper into the lungs of the ship. The metal of the ventilation shaft was cold against my belly, but the air rushing past me was hot. It smelled like a fever, wet heat, copper, and the distinct, cloying scent of infection. I crawled. My knees slammed against the rivets with every push, but I couldn't feel the bruises. The adrenaline cocktail in my blood, mixed with whatever chemical sludge the crew had pumped into me, had turned off the pain receptors. Tomb. The sound vibrated through the thin sheet metal of the duct. Tomb. He was walking on the walls. The captain. The antibody. He was tracking me through the steel. "I can hear your heart, little germ," the voice boomed. It wasn't just audible, it was physical. The sound waves rattled the fillings in my teeth. It beat so fast. A panicked little rhythm. I stopped breathing. I squeezed my eyes shut. Think of something boring. The atomic weight of gold. The capital of Nebraska. Lincoln, I mouthed silently. Lincoln, Lincoln, Lincoln. My right hand twitched. It wasn't a spasm. It was a flex. The new joint, the lump of bone pushing up under the pale skin of my index finger, clicked against the metal floor of the vent. My hand didn't want to think about Lincoln. My hand wanted to dig. It scraped its nails against the galvanization, creating a screech that sounded like a fork on a dinner plate. I slammed my left hand over my right, pinning it down. "Stop it," I hissed at my own limb. The captain paused. The footsteps stopped. I lay in the dark, my face pressed into the dust and grime of the duct. Sniff. Sniff. The sound came from directly below me, through the vent floor. He was standing in the corridor under the duct, smelling the air. "I smell change," the captain rumbled. "You are not just a germ anymore. You are becoming a tumor." He punched the ceiling. The metal plate under my chest buckled upward, slamming into my ribs. I gasped, the air knocked out of me. A fist the size of a cinder block, wrapped in wet grey wool and barnacles, punched through the steel inches from my face. I scrambled backward, kicking out with my boots. The hand groped blindly in the duct, fingers thick as sausages searching for meat. I turned and crawled. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I shimmied through the darkness, scraping my shoulders, tearing my uniform. The duct took a sharp turn downward. I didn't have time to brace. I slid headfirst down a vertical shaft, gaining speed, sliding on a layer of greasy slime that coated the walls. I hit the bottom hard, tumbling out of a vent grate and landing on a soft, wet floor. I groaned, rolling onto my back. I clicked the flashlight on. I wasn't in a hallway anymore. I was in a gallery of rot. This was likely the crew quarters on Deck 3, but it looked like the inside of a stomach lining. The walls were no longer institutional green. They were covered in a thick, reddish-orange moss that pulsed. The rust. It wasn't oxidation. It was biological. The rust was growing over the cabin doors, sealing them shut with crusty scabs. The overhead lights were dim, encrusted with the same orange growth, casting the corridor in a sick, jaundiced glow. I stood up. The floor was sticky. Every step made a sucking sound. I checked the time. 4:20. 40 minutes until the next feeding. I pulled the binder from my jacket. It was warm to the touch. The leather cover was sweating. I opened it to the new page. The red ink was still glistening. Phase 3. Digestion. 1. The rust is hungry. The orange corrosion covering the ship is a digestive enzyme. Do not touch it with bare skin. If you touch it, do not try to wipe it off. Amputate the limb immediately. There are bone saws located in the emergency glass cases every 50 feet. 2. The white blood cells. The moonwalkers, Subject 89, have been repurposed. They are no longer janitors. They are phagocytes. They will attempt to engulf you to recycle your biomass for the entity. They are blind, but they can sense vibration on the wet floor. Do not run. Slide your feet. 3. The immune response. The captain, Subject 01, cannot be killed. He is the ship's immune system. He will not stop until the pathogen, you, is neutralized. His weakness is his size. He cannot fit in the subcorridors. 4. The feeding. The central chute in Bay 4 is closed. The stomach is full. To prevent the ship from entering anaphylactic shock, you must administer an antihistamine. Location: the infirmary, Deck 3. Method: inject the contents of the blue vial into the ventilation filtration unit in the engine room. Deadline: 5 o'clock. I stared at the page. The rules had changed the game entirely. I wasn't feeding a monster in a hole anymore. I was medicating a dying god. Infirmary, I whispered. Deck 3. That's here. I looked down the corridor. The doors were marked with brass plaques, barely visible under the rust. Quartermaster, gunnery, chef. I needed to find the infirmary, and then I needed to get to the engine room, and I had to do it without picking up my feet, while a giant monster hunted me and the walls tried to digest me. I started to shuffle. Slide, slide, slide. My mutated right hand was throbbing. It felt hot, feverish. I looked at it. The veins were turning black. The new finger joint was fully formed now, giving the finger an extra long, jagged appearance. It twitched toward the wall, toward the rust. No, I whispered. My hand wanted to touch the rust. It wanted to commune with the infection. I grabbed my right wrist with my left hand and forced it down to my side. I passed a door marked First Officer. The rust here was thick, forming stalactites that dripped orange slime onto the floor. Suddenly, the door rattled. Not a mechanical rattle. A wet thud from the inside. Help! A voice gurgled. It wasn't the mimicry of the entity. It sounded wet, human, and incredibly pained. I stopped sliding. Help me, the voice choked out. The room, it's getting smaller. I looked at the scabbing over the doorframe. The rust was growing inward, sealing the room. Who are you? I whispered. Dave, the voice said. My heart skipped a beat. Dave, the guy who wrote the notes. The guy who survived long enough to learn the truth about the fingers. Dave, listen to me, I said, leaning close to the door but careful not to touch the rust. I have your notes. I'm following them. How do I get to the infirmary? You can't, Dave wheezed. The hallway. It swallowed the door. It's all just meat now. There has to be a way, I said. The binder says. Burn the binder. Dave screamed. The sound turned into a coughing fit that sounded like he was expelling fluid from his lungs. The binder lies. It changes to give you hope. Hope tastes better. Seasoning. Hope tastes better. Dave, open the door, I said. I have a flare gun. We can burn the rust. I can't, Dave whispered. I'm not near the door anymore. I'm in the wall. My legs. The wall ate my legs, man. It's drinking me. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Run, Dave said. I can hear him. The big one. He's coming down the stairs. Tomb. The vibration traveled through the floor jelly. Tomb. The captain was on deck 3. Go. Dave screamed. Don't let him get the antibodies. I didn't wait. I started sliding again, faster this time, skiing through the slime. I reached a T-junction. Left was mess hall lower. Right was medical. I slid right. The corridor here was worse. The floor wasn't just wet, it was submerged. 6 inches of opaque, orange fluid covered the deck. I stepped in. The liquid was warm. It tingled against my ankles through my boots. Rule 1, do not touch with bare skin. Thank God for combat boots. I waded forward. The fluid was thick, resisting my movement. Ahead, I saw the sign, infirmary. The door was glass, reinforced, wire mesh glass. And it wasn't rusted shut. It was broken, shattered inward. I reached the door and stepped over the jagged glass frame. The infirmary was white, pristine white. The rust hadn't touched it. It was like stepping into a different reality. The air smelled of antiseptic and bleach, sharp and clean. In the center of the room was a metal examination table, and on the table sat a single, blue glass vial. It glowed faintly, illuminated by the clean fluorescent lights overhead. It looked too easy. I approached the table. Rule, the antibody is coming. I grabbed the vial. It was cold. I shoved it into my pocket. Then I saw the mirror. A large, observation mirror on the far wall. I saw my reflection. I looked like a wreck. My uniform was shredded, covered in grey slime and orange rust spots. My face was gaunt, eyes sunken, pupils blown wide. But it was my right hand that made me retch. It wasn't just the extra joint. The skin of my hand was peeling back, revealing something grey and chitinous underneath. And in the palm, in the center of my palm, a slit had opened. A vertical cut, lined with tiny, white ridges. A mouth. My hand had a mouth. I stared at it. The mouth opened and closed, panting. A small, grey tongue flicked out, tasting the antiseptic air. "Oh God," I whispered. I felt a wave of dizziness. The hunger came back, doubling me over. My hand was screaming for food. Not just food, biomass. I looked at the shelves. Bandages, gauze, saline, nothing edible. Then I heard the wet slap. I spun around. Standing in the doorway of the infirmary, blocking the exit, was a moonwalker. But this one was different. It was bloated. Its grey coveralls were stretched tight over a distended belly. Its faceless head was twitching. It sniffed the air. It sensed the blue vial. Or it sensed me. It stepped into the room. Slap. Squish. It didn't have eyes, but it turned its head toward the examination table. "Go away," I warned, raising the flare gun. "I'm out of ammo, but I'll pistol whip you." I wasn't out of ammo. I had one shell left, but I needed it for the captain. The moonwalker opened its chest. Literally. The zipper of the coveralls slid down, and the skin beneath split open like a rib spreader. Inside, there were no organs. There was just a mass of writhing, white tendrils. Phagocytes. It lunged. I fired the flare gun. The magnesium slug hit the massive tendrils inside its chest. Whoosh. The creature didn't scream. It exploded. Gases built up inside its bloated body ignited instantly. Wet chunks of grey flesh and burning white phosphorus sprayed across the pristine white room. I dove behind the examination table. Slime rained down on me. I stood up, wiping the gore from my face. The way was clear. But the noise. The explosion was loud. Tomb. 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 The footsteps upstairs stopped. Then, a massive crash. The ceiling of the infirmary buckled. He wasn't using the stairs. He was coming through the floor. Dust and ceiling tiles rained down. A massive, grey boot, size 20, easily, smashed through the drop ceiling and stomped onto the floor, crushing the examination table flat. I scrambled back against the wall. The captain dropped down. He was a nightmare of maritime decay. He stood 7 feet tall, broad as a vending machine. He wore a tattered, mouldy uniform with gold epaulets that were green with verdigris. His face. He had a face, but it was covered in barnacles. They clustered over his eyes, his nose. Only his mouth was visible, a ragged hole filled with jagged, iron teeth. He turned toward me. The barnacles on his face clicked open, revealing dozens of tiny, wet eyes blinking in the light. "Germ," the captain roared. He swiped a massive hand at me. I ducked. The wind of the swing ruffled my hair. His fist smashed into the wall, punching a hole through the drywall and into the corridor beyond. I didn't think. I acted on instinct. I ran through the hole he just made. I tumbled out into the orange slime of the corridor. "Get back here," the captain bellowed, tearing the wall down to follow me. I scrambled up and ran. I forgot the rule about sliding. I splashed through the orange fluid. The liquid reacted. The moment I splashed, the fluid rose up. It formed tendrils, lashing out like whips. Rule 1. The rust is hungry. A tendril wrapped around my ankle. It burned. Acidic fire. I screamed and kicked out. My mutated right hand lashed out on its own. My hand grabbed the rust tendril. The mouth in my palm bit down. I felt a surge of energy, electric and cold, rush up my arm. My hand chewed through the rust tendril, severing it. The rust recoiled. It hissed. My hand had eaten it? I didn't question it. I ran. I reached the stairwell at the end of the hall. Engine room, 2 decks down. I threw the door open and jumped onto the landing. The stairwell was dark. The emergency lights were dead. I pulled out my flashlight. The beam cut into the abyss below. The stairs were gone. Rusted away. Collapsed. There was just a jagged hole in the center of the shaft, dropping down into darkness. I looked back. The captain was squeezing his bulk through the hole in the wall. The rust tendrils were whipping at him, but he ignored them. He was the antibody. The digestive enzymes didn't hurt him. Nowhere to go, the captain grumbled, stepping into the hallway. I looked at the drop. 2 decks down. Maybe 30 feet. If I jumped, I broke my legs. If I stayed, I got crushed. I looked at the walls of the stairwell shaft. There were cables hanging down. Thick, black power couplings. I holstered the flare gun, useless empty weight now. I zipped the blue vial into my breast pocket. Hey, barnacle brain. I yelled. The captain stopped. The tiny eyes in the barnacles focused on me. You're ugly, I spat. Then I jumped. I leaped into the void, reaching out for the hanging cables. My left hand grabbed a cable. It was slick with grease. I started to slide. Friction burned my glove. My right hand, my monster hand, grabbed the cable. It didn't slip. The claws dug into the rubber insulation. The grip was iron. I jerked to a halt, hanging 15 feet down the shaft. Above me, the captain peered over the edge. He growled, a sound like grinding gears. He reached down, grabbing the cable I was hanging on. He started to pull. He was hauling me up like a fish on a line. I looked down, 15 feet to the grating of the engine room deck. I let go with my left hand. I tried to pry my right hand loose. It wouldn't let go. My mutated hand refused to release the cable. It liked the grip. It liked the stability. Let go. I screamed at my hand. We need to fall. The captain hauled me up another 3 feet. His massive hand was only yards away now. I punched my own arm. I bit my own wrist. Release. The captain laughed. Part of the ship, part of the crew. He reached out to grab my collar. In a moment of pure desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I swung my body and kicked the wall, swinging myself outward, and then slammed my right hand, still gripping the cable, against the rusted steel wall of the shaft. Eat. I screamed at my palm. The mouth in my hand opened. It tasted the rust on the wall. It liked the rust better than the rubber cable. My hand released the cable and latched onto the wall. The claws dug into the steel. The mouth sucked against the metal plate. I hung there, suspended by one mutated limb, stuck to the wall like a spider. The cable, now free of my weight, whipped upward, smacking the captain in the face. He roared in annoyance. I looked down. Okay, hand, I whispered. Walk down. I willed my fingers to move. Release, grab. Release, grab. Slowly, agonizingly, I crawled down the vertical shaft wall. My right hand was doing all the work, scuttling like a crab. I reached the bottom landing. I dropped to the floor grating. My knees buckled, but I was alive. Engine room. The air here was hot and deafening. The massive diesel engines were thumping rhythmically, the heartbeat of the Goliath. I checked the time. 4:50. 10 minutes to the deadline. I needed to find the ventilation filtration unit. The engine room was a labyrinth of pipes, catwalks, and spinning turbines. Steam hissed from loose valves. I ran along the main catwalk. Rule, the white blood cells, will attempt to engulf you. I scanned the shadows. Movement. Beneath the grating. Dozens of them. Moonwalkers. They were crawling on the pipes below the catwalk, looking up at me with their blank faces. They were following me, waiting for me to slip. I reached the central control console. There it was. Atmospheric control air filtration. A massive intake fan, spinning slowly behind a mesh guard. Beside it, a small injection port marked chemical additive. This was it. I unzipped my pocket and pulled out the blue vial. My hands were shaking. 4:55. 5 minutes. I unscrewed the cap of the injection port. Tomb. The door to the engine room blew inward. The captain had jumped. He landed on the catwalk 20 feet behind me. The metal grating bent under his weight, screaming in protest. He stood up, shaking debris from his shoulders. The medicine, the captain rumbled, eyeing the vial in my hand. You think you can cure the hunger? He started walking toward me. The catwalk swayed violently with each of his steps. I fumbled with the vial. The cork was stuck. Stay back. I yelled. The ship needs to feed, the captain said, raising a massive fist. It does not want the antihistamine. It wants the fever. He wasn't just an antibody. He was a radicalized one. He wanted the infection to burn. He charged. A 7-foot wall of barnacles and hate, barreling down a narrow metal walkway. I pulled the cork with my teeth. I spat it out. I jammed the vial into the port. I smashed the plunger down. The blue liquid injected into the system. Hiss. The machine groaned. The intake fan spun faster, whining like a jet engine. The captain was 5 feet away. He raised his fist to crush me into paste. Then, the vents opened. All around the room, overhead vents blasted a cloud of blue gas. The gas hit the captain. He stopped mid-stride. He coughed. A dry, racking cough. The barnacles on his face clamped shut. The grey colour of his skin faded, turning a sickly, pale white. He fell to his knees. "No," he wheezed. "The fire goes out." He slumped forward onto the grating, immobile, asleep, or sedated. I collapsed against the console, sliding down to the floor. I watched the blue gas fill the room. It smelled like lavender and old dust. I looked at the digital clock on the console. 5 o'clock. The red numbers blinked. 5:01. Safe. The feeding was skipped. The ship was drugged. I laughed. A manic, broken sound. "I beat you," I whispered to the sleeping captain. "I beat the rules." I looked at my right hand. The mouth in the palm was closed. The claws were retracted. It looked almost normal, except for the extra joints and the grey colour. I closed my eyes. BZZT. The intercom on the wall crackled to life. "Security," a voice said. It wasn't the man in the yellow slicker. It wasn't the captain. It was a woman's voice. Calm. Professional. "This is bridge control. Is anyone down there?" I scrambled to the intercom. I pressed the button. "Yes. Yes, I'm here. My name is..." "Listen closely," the woman said, cutting me off. "You administered the sedative. Good job." "Get me out of here," I begged. "Send a chopper. Turn the ship around." "We can't do that," the woman said. "The sedative wasn't for the ship. It was for the antibody." I froze. "What?" I looked at the captain. He was still slumped on the floor. "Subject 01 was becoming unstable," the woman explained. "He was damaging the cargo. We needed him neutralized." "But the feeding..." I stammered. The binder said. "The binder is a containment tool," she said. "It keeps you busy. It keeps you terrified. Fear produces cortisol. Cortisol is the real food." My blood ran cold. "You mean..." "Phase 3 wasn't digestion," she said. "Phase 3 was marinating." The floor beneath me rumbled. Not the engine. The ship. "And now," the woman said, her voice dropping an octave, "dinner is served." The floor grating of the catwalk dissolved. Not rusted. Dissolved. Like sugar in hot water. I fell. I fell past the sleeping captain. I fell past the moonwalkers who watched silently from the pipes. I fell into the dark, oily water of the bilge. I splashed down, gasping for air. The water was warm. I turned on my flashlight. I was in a massive, cavernous tank at the bottom of the ship. And I wasn't alone. Rising out of the water, towering above me, was a structure. It looked like a mountain of flesh, eyes, and teeth. It was the entity. It hadn't been in Cargo Bay 4. Cargo Bay 4 was just the feeding tube. This was the stomach. The entity opened 1,000 eyes. They all looked at me. "Hello, little germ," it spoke in my mind. My right hand, my traitorous, mutated hand, lifted itself up. It waved at the mountain of flesh. And the mouth in my palm whispered one word. "Mother." The word didn't just come from the mouth in my palm. It vibrated up my radius, rattled my elbow, and settled deep in the marrow of my shoulder. It was a frequency of absolute submission. The mountain of flesh in the center of the bilge shifted. It was massive, a geography of wet, grey skin rather than a creature. It rose from the oily black water like an island forming in time-lapse. I saw eyes the size of wading pools blinking open, milky and ancient. I saw sphincters opening and closing, exhaling a mist that smelled of ammonia and old blood. I should have died. I should have been snapped up like a krill in front of a blue whale. But the entity didn't attack. It leaned down. A face, if you could call a cluster of sensory organs a face, hovered inches from me. The water around me boiled with the heat radiating from its skin. My right hand reached out further, straining against the tendons of my arm. The mouth in my palm opened wide, the tiny grey tongue lapping at the air. The entity extended a tendril. It was delicate, translucent, pulsing with bioluminescent veins. It touched my mutated hand. A spark jumped between us. Not food, the voice boomed in my skull. It wasn't a sound, it was a headache. Seed. I gagged. The realization hit me harder than the fall from a catwalk. I wasn't the meal. I wasn't the marinating steak. I was the Tupperware container. I was the doggy bag. Go, the entity whispered. Spread. The ship lurched violently. This wasn't a wave. This was impact. The sound of screaming metal tore through the bilge. The hull groaned, a deep, tectonic screech that sounded like the end of the world. We had hit something solid. The water in the bilge began to swirl. A drain had opened somewhere below the entity. The vortex tugged at my legs. The shift is over, the entity said. Its eyes began to close, rolling back into its head. The sun burns. The water level dropped rapidly. The floor of the tank tilted. I slid across the slime-coated steel, tumbling toward a maintenance hatch that had popped open in the far wall. I scrambled through it, clawing my way up a ladder that felt like it was made of razor blades. My body was on autopilot. My brain had shut down hours ago. Now it was just muscle memory and the desperate need to see the sky. I climbed. I passed decks that were no longer rusted. The orange corrosion was flaking off, turning to grey dust as the ship's biological systems went dormant for the day. The veins in the walls stopped pulsing. The heartbeat of the engine slowed to a rhythmic, mechanical chug. I burst through a hatch and spilled out onto the main deck. The light blinded me. It wasn't a bright, cheerful sun. It was the grey, sickly light of a Pacific Northwest dawn. The sky was the colour of a wet sidewalk. Rain was falling, normal, cold, clean rain. I lay on the deck plating, gasping for air. The rain washed the slime from my face, but it couldn't wash the smell of the bilge out of my pores. I rolled over and looked at the ship. The MV Goliath didn't look like a biological nightmare anymore. It just looked like a wreck. The rust was just rust. The black paint was peeled and ugly. There were no eyes in the barnacles. The windows of the bridge were dark and empty. We were docked. I sat up. We were in Tacoma again. The familiar skeletal cranes of the port loomed overhead. The smell of diesel and rotting kelp was back. I looked at my right hand. I shoved it into my jacket pocket immediately. I couldn't look at it. I could feel the mouth in my palm shivering in the cold, damp air. It was thirsty. A gangway rattled down from the deck to the concrete pier. Standing at the bottom wasn't the man in the yellow slicker. It was a woman in a crisp, charcoal business suit. She held a black umbrella in one hand and a tablet in the other. She looked completely out of place among the shipping containers and industrial grime. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. I walked to the gangway. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just walked, my boots heavy with the weight of what I carried. I reached the bottom. The woman looked me up and down. Her expression was one of mild distaste, like she was inspecting a piece of luggage that had been mishandled. "Contractor 449?" she asked. Her voice was sharp, clear. "Human?" "Yeah," I croaked. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. She tapped something on her tablet. "Shift complete. Survival confirmed. Cargo integrity." She paused, looking up at the silent ship. "Acceptable." She reached into her blazer and pulled out a white envelope. She held it out to me. "Your compensation. $20,000, cashier's check. Tax-free, as per the NDA." I stared at the envelope. It looked so clean. I reached out with my left hand, my human hand, and took it. "Is that it?" I whispered. "I just... go." The woman smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "The contract is fulfilled," she said. "You survived the night. Most don't." "What about?" I nodded toward the ship. "What about the captain? What about Dave? The things in the walls?" "Industrial accidents," she said smoothly. "Hazards of the trade. They will be logged." She took a step back. "One final instruction," she said. "Check your pocket." I froze. Which pocket? The jacket. Left side. I reached into my left pocket, not the one hiding the mutation. I pulled out a small, plastic card. It was a business card. It was black, with a single phone number printed in white. No name. "You have been exposed to high levels of biological contaminants," the woman said. "If you experience symptoms, fever, hallucinations, cravings for raw meat, or unauthorized tissue growth, call that number. We have a sanitation team." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the wet concrete. A black SUV pulled up out of the fog. She got in, and it drove away. I was alone on the dock. I walked to my car. It was exactly where I left it in the long-term lot. A beat-up sedan with a dying transmission. It looked beautiful. I unlocked the door and sat in the driver's seat. The smell of stale fast food and pine air freshener was overwhelming. It smelled like the real world. I started the engine. It sputtered, then caught. I drove. I didn't go home. I couldn't go home. Not yet. I drove until I found a 24-hour diner off the I-5. The kind with sticky tables and coffee that tastes like battery acid. I sat in a booth in the back corner. I kept my right hand jammed deep in my jacket pocket. A waitress came over. She looked tired. "What can I get you, hun?" "Coffee," I said. "Black. And meat." "We got burgers, steak and eggs, sausage." "Steak," I said. "Rare. Very rare. Blue, if you can do it." She raised an eyebrow but wrote it down. "You got it. Rough night." I let out a laugh that sounded like a bark. "You have no idea." She walked away. I pulled the envelope out. I tore it open. The check was real. $20,000. I could fix my car. I could pay my rent. I could pay off my credit cards. I looked at the black business card. Sanitation team. I knew what that meant. It meant a bullet in the back of the head. I felt a twitch in my pocket. My right hand was waking up. The warmth of the diner was agitating it. The mouth in my palm opened. I could feel the wet tongue sliding against the lining of my pocket. It nipped at my hip through the fabric of my jeans. Hungry, it whispered against my thigh. I looked down. A small spot of saliva was soaking through my jacket. The waitress came back with the coffee. She set it down. "Steak's coming right up," she said. She lingered for a second. "Hey," she said, looking at me with concern. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." She nodded. "Well, drink up. We are open all day." She turned to walk away. As she turned, her apron brushed against my shoulder. My right hand slammed against the underside of the table. "Feed," the voice in my pocket shrieked. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a demand. The waitress stopped. She looked back. "Did you say something?" "No," I said, sweat breaking out on my forehead. "No, nothing." She shrugged and walked back to the kitchen. I gripped my wrist under the table. My mutated fingers were clawing at the wood, gouging deep splinters into the table bottom. The mouth was salivating uncontrollably. It didn't want the steak. It wanted the waitress. I stared at the check on the table. $20,000. I looked at the door. I grabbed the check. I grabbed the black card. I stood up and ran out of the diner before the steak arrived. I sat in my car in the parking lot, hyperventilating. The rain drummed on the roof. I looked at my hand. I pulled it out of the pocket. In the grey morning light, it looked worse. The skin was turning a translucent grey. The veins were black. And the mouth. The mouth had teeth now. Tiny, serrated ridges of bone pushing through the gums. It snapped at the air. "Mother is far," the hand whispered. "We must build a new nest." I started to cry. Silent, shaking sobs. I wasn't a survivor. The woman at the dock was wrong. I wasn't the contractor. I was the cargo. I put the car in gear. I merged onto the highway, heading north, away from the city, away from people. I need to find a place to hide. A place with a freezer. A place with heavy locks. If you see a job listing for Maritime Asset Protection, don't click it. And if you see a beat-up sedan parked at a rest stop, windows fogged up, rocking gently on its suspension, don't knock on the glass. Don't ask if I'm okay, because I'm not, and I'm starving.